bodies have ever been produced. No evidence of their death has ever been produced.
It's still one of the great mysteries of the 20th century.
Alcatraz was a place where danger was the norm, an inescapable fortress that housed the most dangerous criminals to ever live. Alvin Karpis orchestrated 10 murders and earned the title Public Enemy #1. But if you think he's dangerous, just wait until you hear about Kretzer, a man who executed guards at point-blank range during Alcatraz's bloodiest siege. Even he pales compared to Stroud, whose violent outbursts kept him in solitary for 42 years. From murderers to terrorists, these are the most dangerous inmates ever locked up on the Rock. Al Capone. When Alphonse Scarface Capone arrived at Alcatraz in August 1934, he was already a household name. The infamous Chicago mob boss had built an empire during Prohibition through bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution. Though suspected of orchestrating countless murders, including the brutal St. Valentine's Day massacre that left 7 rival gang members dead, it was ultimately tax evasion that brought him down. What made Capone particularly dangerous wasn't just his violent past, but his extraordinary influence. At Atlanta Federal Prison, where he was initially sent, Capone essentially ran the place, bribing guards and inmates alike for special treatment. Alcatraz was specifically designed to neutralize this kind of manipulation, with strict rules enforced by Warden James A. Johnston. The Rock humbled Capone. His attempts to work the system failed miserably, landing him in solitary confinement. His notoriety made him a target. In June 1936, another inmate, James Lucas, stabbed him with scissors in the shower room. To make matters worse, untreated syphilis was steadily destroying his brain, causing mental instability and physical weakness. Though he avoided further violence at Alcatraz, guards noted his arrogance and sense of entitlement. In a bizarre twist, Capone played banjo in the prison band, and to this day, guards report hearing ghostly banjo sounds echoing through the empty prison. Declining health led to his transfer to Terminal Island in January 1939, and he was released later that year. The syphilis had progressed to neurosyphilis, causing dementia, and he lived his final years in Florida, a shadow of his former self, until his death in 1947. Gangsters may rule the streets with money and influence, but Capone discovered that on the Rock, everyone was just another number. Speaking of notorious gangsters, our next inmate earned his nickname through his weapon of choice: George Machine Gun Kelly. George Kelly Barnes didn't start out as a hardened criminal. He actually had a privileged upbringing and briefly attended university, but the opportunities of Prohibition proved too tempting, and he found himself drawn into bootlegging, bank robberies, and eventually the high-profile 1933 kidnapping of oil tycoon Charles Urschel. The kidnapping netted Kelly a $200,000 ransom, an enormous sum at the time, but also earned him a life sentence. It was Kelly's wife, Catherine Thorne, who reportedly armed him with his signature Thompson submachine gun and built up his fearsome reputation. The FBI considered him extremely dangerous, especially after he boasted about escaping from Leavenworth Prison. This threat prompted his transfer to the newly opened Alcatraz in September 1934. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. The feared Machine Gun Kelly became one of Alcatraz's most compliant inmates. His fellow prisoners mockingly nicknamed him Pop Gun because of his docile behavior. He worked in the prison office, served as an altar boy in the chapel, and even expressed genuine remorse for his crimes. Despite this reformed behavior, his violent criminal history and expertise in kidnapping kept him classified as high risk. After nearly 17 years on the Rock, one of the longest stays among famous inmates, he was transferred back to Leavenworth in 1951, where he died of a heart attack in 1954. Machine guns and kidnapping may have been Kelly's path to infamy, but our next inmate gained his notoriety through a completely different passion, one that gave him one of history's most misleading nicknames: Robert Stroud, Birdman of Alcatraz. Despite his famous nickname, Robert Stroud never kept a single bird during his 17 years at Alcatraz. His story begins with manslaughter, killing a man in Alaska in 1909 over a dispute involving a prostitute. At USP McNeil Island, he attacked another inmate, earning a transfer to Leavenworth. There, in 1916, he murdered a guard, was sentenced to death, but had his sentence commuted to life by President Woodrow Wilson after his mother pleaded for mercy. It was at Leavenworth where Stroud developed his interest in ornithology, breeding canaries in his cell, and eventually publishing 2 respected books on bird diseases. However, this peaceful hobby masked his true nature. Prison officials discovered his bird equipment was being used to brew alcohol, and in 1942, he was transferred to Alcatraz and barred from keeping birds. birds. Guards described Stroud as having a Jekyll and Hyde personality, calm when working with birds, but violently unpredictable otherwise. His intelligence made him manipulative and dangerous. During his 54 years of incarceration across various prisons, he spent a staggering 42 years in solitary confinement. At Alcatraz, he spent 6 years in segregation and 11 in the hospital ward. The 1962 film Birdman of Alcatraz, starring Burt Lancaster, portrayed Stroud as a gentle, misunderstood scholar, a characterization that guards dismissed as a joke. The real Stroud never saw the film, which earned Lancaster an Oscar nomination. At Alcatraz, with no birds to study, he focused on writing a prison history and studying law. After 17 years at Alcatraz, Stroud was transferred to the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Missouri, where he died in 1963. From birds to bullets, Alcatraz housed them all. Our next inmate wasn't just dangerous, he holds the record for the longest stay at the Rock. Alvin "Creepy" Karpis. With his unsettling smile that earned him the nickname Creepy, Alvin Karpis led the notorious Barker Karpis gang through a reign of terror during the Depression era. His criminal resume was impressive: bank robberies, kidnappings, most notably Edward Bremer in 1934, and multiple murders. The FBI named him Public Enemy Number 1 before his capture in 1936, which resulted in a life sentence for kidnapping. What made Karpis exceptionally dangerous was his combination of criminal leadership and high intelligence. With an estimated IQ of around 130, a photographic memory, and strong organizational skills, he masterminded operations that resulted in 10 murders, 6 kidnappings, and numerous robberies. Even at Alcatraz, he remained a significant threat, frequently fighting with other inmates, complaining about conditions, and plotting escapes. Karpis has the distinction of being personally arrested by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover in 1936, a high-profile capture that boosted Hoover's public image. At Alcatraz, Karpis would serve a staggering 26 years, the longest tenure of any inmate at the prison. After Alcatraz closed in 1963, Karpis was transferred to another facility and eventually paroled in 1969. He was deported to Canada, his birthplace, and wrote 2 memoirs about his criminal career. His life ended in Spain in 1979 from what was reported as an accidental sleeping pill overdose. One criminal mastermind down, but he didn't work alone. Our next dangerous inmate was his partner in the notorious Barker Karpis gang, Arthur "Doc" Barker. As the son of the infamous Kate "Ma" Barker and a key member of the Barker Karpis gang, Arthur "Doc" Barker was born into a life of crime. His rap sheet included kidnapping, specifically Edward Bremer in 1934, the same crime that put Karpis away, robbery, and murder, including killing a policeman during a robbery. These serious offenses earned him a life sentence in 1935 and a one-way ticket to Alcatraz. Barker's violent tendencies made him a high-risk inmate from the moment he arrived. His family background in the notorious Barker Karpis gang, one of the most feared criminal organizations of the Depression era, only added to his dangerous reputation. Unlike some inmates who settled into prison life, Barker remained restless and defiant. On January 13, 1939, Barker decided he'd had enough of Alcatraz. He led an escape attempt with 4 other inmates: Henry Young, Rufus McCain, Dale Stamphill, and William Martin. The group managed to soar through their cell bars and reach the water's edge of the island, but they were cornered by guards before they could get into the bay. Young, McCain, and Martin surrendered when caught, but Barker and Stamphill refused, leading guards to open fire. Barker was shot and died from his injuries, bringing his criminal career to a violent end after just 4 years at Alcatraz. His recklessness during the escape attempt, choosing to risk death rather than surrender, demonstrated the dangerous mindset that had followed him throughout his criminal life. Death on the Rock came in many forms, some swift like Barker's, others decades in the making. But our next inmate's Alcatraz story was just the beginning of a much longer criminal saga. James "Whitey" Bulger. Before he became one of Boston's most feared mob bosses, James "Whitey" Bulger got his criminal start with a 1956 conviction for armed robbery, resulting in a stint at Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. There, he volunteered for a CIA program called MK Ultra, where he was given LSD and other drugs as part of controversial mind control experiments, an experience that may have further destabilized an already violent personality. Bulger's planning of a 1959 escape from Atlanta prompted his transfer to Alcatraz, though his time at the Rock was relatively brief and subdued compared to his later notoriety. Prison officials were keenly aware of his manipulative tendencies and potential for violence. His transfer to Alcatraz was primarily precautionary, reflecting the prison's role in housing inmates who presented escape risks. After serving about 3 years at Alcatraz until the prison's 1963 closure, Bulger was transferred and eventually released in 1965. This is where his story takes an even darker turn. Back in Boston, Bulger rose through the ranks to become a powerful mob leader, eventually being implicated in at least 11 murders, though the actual count may be closer to 19. What made Bulger's post-Alcatraz career particularly insidious was his relationship with the FBI. He became an informant while simultaneously running his criminal empire, using his FBI connections to eliminate rivals and protect his operations. When his FBI handler tipped him off about an upcoming indictment in 1994, Bulger went on the run, remaining a fugitive for 16 years until his capture in 2011. In 2013, Bulger was convicted of 11 murders, racketeering, and other crimes. He was killed by fellow inmates shortly after being transferred to a West Virginia prison in 2018. From made men to escape artists, Alcatraz tried to hold them all. Our next inmate earned his reputation by repeatedly slipping away from justice. Roy Gardner. Known as the King of the Escape Artists, Roy Gardner's criminal career centered on bank and train robberies in the 1920s. He wasn't just any thief. Gardner managed to steal over $350,000, equivalent to millions today, through meticulously planned mail truck and railway heists. His capture and 25-year sentence for robbery seemed like the end of his story, but Gardner had other plans. What made Gardner such a threat to the prison system was his uncanny ability to escape. Before arriving at Alcatraz, he had already broken out of custody 3 times, cementing his reputation as a flight risk of the highest order. His transfer to the Rock in its opening month of August 1934 was specifically to neutralize this talent. At Alcatraz, Gardner's escape expertise kept guards on high alert. He reportedly planned another breakout but was released in 1938 before he could execute it. Following his release, Gardner wrote a memoir titled Alcatraz, 1939, which harshly criticized the prison's conditions and reflected his continued defiance of authority. Gardner's book provides a rare first-hand account of early life at Alcatraz, though its sensationalized tone may exaggerate the conditions. What's clear is that the Rock succeeded where other prisons had failed. It kept Gardner contained until his legitimate release. Tragically, Gardner struggled to reintegrate into society after his imprisonment. The man who had repeatedly outwitted the justice system found civilian life impossible to navigate, and he committed suicide in 1940, just 2 years after his release. Unlike our previous escapee, our next inmate might have pulled off the impossible, the only potentially successful escape from Alcatraz in its entire history. Frank Morris. Frank Morris wasn't just any criminal. He was a mastermind with an IQ of 133 and a history of breaking out of other facilities. His convictions for bank robbery and burglary earned him a 14-year sentence, but it was his multiple prison escapes that landed him at Alcatraz in January 1960. Morris quickly proved why he was considered so dangerous. On June 11, 1962, he executed what would become the most famous prison break in American history. Together with brothers John and Clarence Anglin, Morris meticulously planned and carried out an escape that seemed impossible. Using spoons and a makeshift drill fashioned from a vacuum cleaner motor, the trio dug through the aging concrete walls behind their cells. They created papier-mâché dummy heads with real hair from the prison barbershop to fool guards during night checks. They even constructed a makeshift raft from raincoats, sealing the seams with heat from the prison's steam pipes. The escape was executed with military precision. The 3 men slipped out through their cell walls, climbed up a utility corridor to the roof, descended to the ground, and disappeared into the cold waters of San Francisco Bay. Despite one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history, they were never found. Either they drowned in the treacherous currents, as officials concluded, or they pulled off the perfect escape. The 1962 escape, later detailed in the 1979 film Escape from Alcatraz, exposed vulnerabilities in the prison's security and contributed to its closure in 1963. A 2013 letter allegedly from John Anglin claimed the trio survived, but no definitive evidence has ever emerged to confirm their fate. Morris's escape plan remains a benchmark for prison break attempts, combining intelligence, resourcefulness, and sheer determination in a way few inmates before or since have managed. Where there's a criminal mastermind, there are often willing accomplices. Our next 2 entries work together with Morris to challenge the Rock's reputation as escape-proof. John Anglin. The older of the two Anglin brothers involved in the famous 1962 escape. John Anglin's criminal career began far from Alcatraz's imposing walls. Together with his brother Clarence, John was convicted of bank robbery in the 1950s, using toy guns rather than real weapons, a detail that makes their eventual transfer to America's highest security prison somewhat ironic. What earned the Anglins their place at Alcatraz wasn't the severity of their crimes, but their multiple escape attempts from other prisons. John was sentenced to 15-20 years and initially served time at Atlanta Penitentiary before being transferred to Alcatraz in 1960, where he was joined by his brother Clarence the following year. John's role in the 1962 escape with Morris and Clarence showcased remarkable ingenuity. The trio's use of vent holes as access points, dummy heads to fool guards, and a homemade raft demonstrated sophisticated planning. Their rural Alabama upbringing and close brotherhood likely contributed to their ability to work together effectively. The uncertainty surrounding John's fate after the escape adds to his mystique. While most evidence suggests the three men drowned in the cold, turbulent waters of San Francisco Bay, some testimony from U.S. Marshal Mike Dyke suggested they may have stolen a car after reaching land. A 2013 letter, purportedly from John Anglin, claimed all three survived, with John claiming to be in his 80s at the time of writing. Whether John Anglin perished in the Bay or managed to build a new life in freedom remains one of America's most enduring criminal mysteries. The FBI officially closed the case in 1979, but speculation continues to this day about the only prisoners who might have successfully escaped from Alcatraz. Where one Anglin brother went, the other followed. Our next dangerous inmate was the younger half of this criminal partnership. Clarence Anglin. Like his brother John, Clarence Anglin's path to Alcatraz began with relatively modest crimes, bank robberies committed with toy guns. It was his persistent attempts to escape from other facilities, including Leavenworth, that marked him as a significant flight risk and earned him a transfer to Alcatraz in 1961, a year after his brother arrived. Clarence's partnership with his brother John and Frank Morris in planning the 1962 escape reflected remarkable determination and resourcefulness. The brothers' teamwork, forged through a lifetime of close collaboration, significantly enhanced the escape plot's complexity and chances of success. The preparations for the escape were meticulous and ingenious. The trio used stolen spoons, a homemade drill, and raincoat glue to fashion their tools and raft. They created ventilation shafts in the utility corridor behind their cells, gradually widening them until they could squeeze through. All of this was done while maintaining a normal prison routine to avoid suspicion. Like his brother, Clarence's fate after the escape remains uncertain. While official reports concluded that the escapees drowned, the FBI continued investigating leads for years, and some evidence suggests they might have survived. Family members have claimed to have received cards and gifts from the brothers after the escape, though none of these claims has been definitively verified. From potential escapees to infamous mobsters, The Rock held them all. Our next inmate brought the glamour and danger of organized crime to Alcatraz. Maya Mickey Cohen. As a flamboyant Los Angeles-based Jewish mafia figure, Maya Mickey Cohen brought a different brand of danger to Alcatraz. Cohen was convicted of tax evasion in 1961 and sentenced to 15 years, the same charge that had brought down Al Capone decades earlier. Behind this seemingly mundane financial crime lay a career built on extortion, gambling, and racketeering. Cohen's ties to organized crime, including his association with figures like Bugsy Siegel, made him particularly dangerous. His volatile temper and network of criminal connections remained a concern even within Alcatraz's isolated environment. Unlike some inmates who faded into anonymity within the prison system, Cohen maintained his high profile and influence. This notoriety made Cohen a target. In 1963, fellow inmate Burton Phillips attacked him with a lead pipe, partially paralyzing him. The attack demonstrated how even Alcatraz's strict supervision couldn't completely prevent violence between inmates, particularly when high-profile criminals were involved. Cohen was vocal about his disdain for Alcatraz, calling it a crumbling dungeon, a description that reflected his defiance of authority even in confinement. After the attack, he was transferred to another facility and eventually paroled in 1972. True to his criminal nature, Cohen resumed illegal activities after his release. Unlike Capone, whose mental faculties were destroyed by disease while at Alcatraz, Cohen remained active until his death from cancer in 1976. His brief but tumultuous stint at Alcatraz represents the prison's final years, as it closed shortly after his transfer in 1963. From the glitz of organized crime to the dark depths of human depravity, our next inmate showcased just how disturbed some of Alcatraz's residents could be. Roof Percival. Few inmates at Alcatraz had a more disturbing backstory than Roof Percival. Convicted of murder, robbery, and kidnapping, Percival earned a life sentence. But what truly set him apart was his time at Arkansas State Penitentiary before Alcatraz, where he served as an enforcer, shooting escaping prisoners and killing multiple inmates. This history as a trustee, a prisoner given special privileges and responsibilities, made Percival uniquely despised by his fellow inmates when he arrived at Alcatraz in 1935. His reputation as a wanton killer followed him, and he faced severe abuse from other prisoners who viewed him as a traitor to their unwritten code. The psychological toll of this isolation and abuse manifested in one of Alcatraz's most shocking incidents of self-harm. In 1937, in a desperate bid to be transferred away from the rock, Percival grabbed a hatchet from the prison workshop and chopped off 4 of his own fingers. This extreme act of self-mutilation stunned even hardened guards and inmates alike, providing a glimpse into Percival's deteriorating mental state. His ploy eventually worked. Percival was transferred out of Alcatraz in 1941, likely to a medical facility, though records of his subsequent fate are limited. His case illustrates the psychological pressure cooker that Alcatraz could become for inmates, particularly those who entered with reputations that made them targets. Self-harm was one manifestation of mental instability at Alcatraz, but our next inmate showed how such instability could turn outward with deadly consequences. Sam Shockley. Sam Shockley arrived at Alcatraz in 1938 with convictions for bank robbery and kidnapping, sentenced to life imprisonment. What made Shockley particularly dangerous wasn't the sophistication of his crimes, but his unpredictable nature, exacerbated by mental instability that gave him the cognitive capacity equivalent to a 10-year-old. This combination of limited understanding and violent tendencies made Shockley a persistent management challenge for Alcatraz staff. His erratic behavior and impulsivity meant guards could never predict when he might lash out, creating a constant undercurrent of tension. Shockley's dangerous nature came to a head during the infamous Battle of Alcatraz from May 2 to 4, 1946. During this bloody escape attempt, Shockley encouraged fellow inmate Joe Kretzer to shoot hostages, resulting in the deaths of 2 guards, William Miller and Harold Stites. Though some inmates involved in the uprising claimed Shockley's role was minimal and influenced by his mental limitations, the courts disagreed. For his part in the deadly riot, Shockley was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. On December 3, 1948, he was executed in San Quentin's gas chamber alongside another Alcatraz rioter, Miran Thompson. His execution reflected the era's harsh approach to prison violence, with little consideration for his mental capacity. The Battle of Alcatraz, that sealed Shockley's fate, was the deadliest escape attempt in the prison's history, involving a 48-hour standoff so serious that U.S. Marines were called in to help end it. Mental instability fueled violence in many of Alcatraz's darkest moments, but our next inmate was cold, calculating, and brutally efficient. Joe Kretzer. With convictions for bank robbery and the murder of a U.S. Marshal in Tacoma, Washington, Joe Kretzer arrived at Alcatraz in 1941, already marked as highly dangerous. His history of violent crime was compounded by a previous prison escape, making him exactly the kind of inmate Alcatraz was designed to contain. Kretzer quickly established himself as one of the Rock's most dangerous residents. In 1946, he emerged as the ringleader of the bloody Battle of Alcatraz, one of the most violent episodes in American prison history. During this failed escape attempt, Kretzer and other inmates overpowered guards, seized weapons from the armory, and took control of part of the cell house. What made Kretzer particularly dangerous was his ruthlessness. When the escape plan faltered because the inmates couldn't locate a key to the recreation yard door, Kretzer reportedly shot hostages at point-blank range, killing officers William Miller and Harold Stites. This willingness to murder showed a complete disregard for human life. The escape attempt deteriorated into a full-blown siege that lasted 48 hours. Marines were called in, and grenades were dropped into the cell block. When authorities finally regained control on May 4, 1946, Kretzer was found dead from gunfire, alongside fellow rioters Bernard Coy and Marvin Hubbard. Kretzer's leadership in this violent revolt, which resulted in the deaths of 2 officers and 3 inmates, cemented his reputation as one of Alcatraz's most dangerous prisoners. His willingness to murder guards and his ability to organize other inmates into a coordinated attack demonstrated why he warranted placement in America's most secure prison. His death during the escape attempt ended what guards described as a constant threat to prison security. The Battle of Alcatraz exposed vulnerabilities in the prison's security systems, particularly around weapon storage, and led to significant significant reforms. From leaders to followers, Alcatraz housed them all. But our next inmate proves that sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones giving orders, but the ones carrying them out with precision. Bernard Coy. If Joe Kretzer was the triggerman in the 1946 Battle of Alcatraz, Bernard Coy was its architect. Sent to the Rock in 1937 on a life sentence for bank robbery and murder, Coy spent years meticulously studying the prison's security procedures, looking for weaknesses he could exploit. What made Coy particularly dangerous was his methodical approach to violence. On May 2, 1946, he put his plan into action. Taking advantage of a security lapse, Coy managed to spread the bars in the gun gallery using a homemade bar spreader, giving him access to the weapons room. Wearing a guard's uniform he had stolen, he overpowered an officer and accessed the cell house keys. Coy's strategic planning enabled the group, which included Kretzer, to take control of the main cell house temporarily. His ability to orchestrate a coordinated attack highlighted both his cunning and the ever-present danger he posed to prison security. The escape plan fell apart when the inmates couldn't find the key to the recreation yard door. Trapped in the cell house with no escape route, the situation deteriorated into the violent standoff we now know as the Battle of Alcatraz. Like Kretzer, Coy was killed during the final assault on May 4, 1946, still wearing the guard's uniform he had stolen, a final symbol of his almost successful attempt to beat the system. From failed escapes to successful murders, Alcatraz inmates found various ways to express their violence. Our next inmate proved that even the prison's workshops could become scenes of deadly confrontation. Henry Young. Henry Young's road to infamy began with bank robbery and murder convictions in 1933, earning him a life sentence and eventually a transfer to Alcatraz in 1935. Like many of the prison's most dangerous inmates, Young was constantly looking for a way out. In January 1939, Young joined Arthur "Doc" Barker and several other inmates in an escape attempt that ended with Barker's death when he refused to surrender to guards. Young survived the failed escape, but spent nearly 4 years in solitary confinement as punishment, though not the continuous solitary later portrayed in Hollywood. What cemented Young's dangerous reputation occurred on December 3, 1940. While working in the prison tailor shop, Young stabbed fellow inmate Rufus McCain to death with a spoon that he had sharpened into a lethal weapon. McCain had been one of Young's companions in the earlier escape attempt, suggesting the murder may have stemmed from disputes or perceived betrayal related to that failed breakout. Young's trial for McCain's murder became famous in its own right. His defense team argued that Alcatraz's harsh conditions, particularly prolonged solitary confinement, had driven him to murder. This case drew public attention to the psychological effects of Alcatraz's isolation techniques. The 1995 film Murder in the First dramatized this trial, though it significantly exaggerated the extent of Young's solitary confinement. Despite the notoriety of his crime, Young received just a 3-year sentence for McCain's death, to be served concurrently with his existing sentence. He remained at Alcatraz until 1948, when he was transferred to another facility. He was eventually paroled in 1972, but disappeared after violating parole, leaving his ultimate fate unknown. Weapons of opportunity define prison violence, from sharpened spoons to improvised hammers. Our next inmate showed just how deadly such tools could become in the hands of a desperate man. James Lucas. James Lucas arrived at Alcatraz in 1935 to serve a 30-year sentence for bank robbery and auto theft. While these crimes were serious, they didn't immediately mark him as one of the prison's most dangerous inmates. However, Lucas would soon prove that danger at Alcatraz could come from unexpected sources. In June 1936, Lucas made headlines by attacking the prison's most famous inmate, Al Capone, stabbing him with scissors in the shower room. This assault on such a high-profile prisoner demonstrated Lucas's willingness to target anyone, regardless of their reputation or connections. Lucas's most violent act came on May 23, 1938, when he joined Thomas Limerick and Rufus Franklin in a desperate escape attempt. The trio attacked guard Royal Klein with a hammer, fatally injuring him. They managed to reach the prison roof, but were spotted by guard Harold Stites, who opened fire. Limerick was killed in the exchange, while Lucas and Franklin were captured. For their roles in Klein's murder, Lucas and Franklin received life sentences. This violent escape attempt, which claimed the life of a guard, solidified Lucas's reputation as one of Alcatraz's most dangerous inmates. His willingness to use deadly force against both fellow inmates and prison staff made him a persistent threat to prison security. Lucas remained at Alcatraz until 1951, when he was transferred to another facility and eventually released. Limited records exist about his life after prison, suggesting he may have faded into obscurity, a stark contrast to the notoriety he earned during his violent years on the Rock. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.